This video will guide you through how VisionWorks, our next-generation life planning software, can take your financial planning business to the highest level.
Thank you for your time. Today we're going to talk about the estate output and estate planning tactics. To our knowledge, only VisionWorks integrates the terms of wills into the financial forecast, and yet wills are the cornerstone of estate planning. For mass affluent and higher net worth clients, assuring them that they'll be okay in retirement may be comforting, but it's not a meaningful revelation. The real value add for mass affluent and higher net worth clients is in uncovering estate issues. And this is possible only when the terms of wills are integrated into the financial forecast. We believe that all other software assumes that assets roll over tax-free to the surviving partner and are taxed on the survivor's death. But what about clients who are in second marriages and have blended families? It's very unlikely that all assets will go to the surviving partner. It's much more likely that some assets will go to children from a previous marriage, which could have a significant impact on the financial well-being of the surviving partner. If your software can't integrate the terms of wills into the financial forecast, the plans that you're creating for these clients are anywhere from slightly to extremely inaccurate and misleading. And of course, we'll see that in some examples today. We're going to start by looking at the layout of the estate tab just to get you oriented to it. But we'll spend most of our time looking at estate planning tactics, including clients who don't have a will and what to do if that's the case, assets that are left to children from a previous marriage, trusts such as a testamentary spousal trust, the use of life insurance, charitable donations, and finally, the importance of the order of withdrawals for retirement assets such as RIFs. Let's start by having a quick look at the estate tab. But before we get into it, I just want to remind you that when it comes to assets like TFSAs, RRSPs, and insurance policies, the beneficiary designation for them is included in the asset itself. And I also want to remind you that when setting up beneficiary designations for them, that you need to enter not only the beneficiary, but also a contingent beneficiary. So we see for Bill's TFSA, the beneficiary is Sue, the contingent beneficiary is Bill Jr. And the reason for this is that when we do a life insurance needs analysis for Sue and have her die today, then when the software on Bill's death looks to leave his TFSA to Sue, it realizes that Sue is no longer alive and therefore leaves the asset to the contingent beneficiary. And again, that would be within a life insurance needs analysis for Sue, where normally we're expecting her to outlive Bill, but in this particular case, we would be looking at her predeceasing him. So let's go back to the estate tab and just get oriented to it. First of all, there's a beneficiary table, and in Bill's case, his sole beneficiary is Sue. And what you'll see if there are multiple entries in the beneficiary table is that when you select an entry, all of these fields in the lower part represent the assets that will be left to the selected beneficiary. So if I had someone else as a beneficiary and click their name, then these fields would change to the things that they would receive. As far as identifying what's involved with all of these different fields, if you click help, what's this help, and then click on a field, you'll get an explanation of all the fields on that side of the panel. The other thing we need to be familiar with is the residue for distribution. So if I click Show Table, what we're going to see are all the ingredients that are used to calculate the residue. And the residue basically is bank accounts, non-registered portfolios, because they can't have beneficiary designations. TFSAs and RRSPs, for example, can have beneficiary designations because they're trusts. But bank accounts and non-registered portfolios, with the exception of seg fund portfolios, can't have beneficiaries. So the value of them goes into a pot, and from that pot, terminal taxes are paid, probate fees are paid, funeral expenses are paid, and then what's left over is the residue, and then it's distributed according to the percent allocation terms in the will. Now, in this particular case, Bill has no liquid assets because Bill and Sue have a joint bank account and a joint non-registered portfolio. So since they're joint tenant with right of survivorship, on Bill's death, those assets automatically belong to Sue. He has nothing. So the other thing that I'll just remind you about is that if you click these little edit buttons, you'll see, for example, the calculation of the terminal tax return. Or if we're over here on the right and you click an edit button, you'll see the specifics of what's involved in, that higher level field. And again, when it comes to what do all these fields mean, if we click help, what's this help, and then click on any field, you'll see an explanation of what's involved in all of them. So that's the general layout of the estate tab. What we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at a solution which I've just called no will. So if we select it and then go to the will page, what you'll see is that the checkbox that says recently updated will is deselected, and that then disables all the features on the will tab. So no ability to create beneficiaries for specific assets, no ability to leave a dollar amount to a beneficiary. I bequeath to my niece Susie $25,000. No ability to indicate the percentage distribution of the residue. That's all mandated by law. So if we go down now and have a look at the solutions output, the estate tab, and this is exactly the same solution as before, except that we don't have a will in place. What you'll see is that Sue gets certain assets, Bill's half of the house, the joint non-reg portfolio. She gets the remaining value of the RSP and TFSA because, of course, the beneficiaries were designated within them. Also, the life insurance benefit. But you'll notice there's a preferential share and then the residue for distribution. So any assets that are in Bill's name, and I have for him some art, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and also the cottage is in Bill's name. So I'm looking at this, and we'll again do a case on this, where this is a second marriage for Bill. In his former relationship, his previous wife ended up with the house, he ended up with the cottage, it's his asset. So any of his assets then get thrown into a general bucket, so to speak. There is a preferential share, which in Ontario is $350,000. And then whatever is left over after that is then distributed 50% to the surviving partner and 50% amongst the children. So in this case, the value of the cottage, the art, and so on, $2.25 million, less taxes, capital gains on the cottage, probate fees, this preferential share leaves 1.3 million, and then that's divided equally in this case between Sue, 677,000, and Bill Jr. as the only child, 677,000. So we're able very easily to show people what the consequences are of not having a will in order to hopefully light a fire under them so that they get their will done right away. Now, I would not work with a client where there is no will in place and then try and start to do a financial forecast, because we get into all of these estate issues on Bill's death, which may be completely unintended. Maybe he wants the cottage to go to Bill Jr., and again, we'll look at that. So what I would do is I would create a new solution, and I'll remind you that to create solutions, you just need to select one, click the copy button. It makes an identical copy. And then what I would do is I would go and mock up the terms of the will. That will not only inform clients when they do go and see a lawyer about, how they want to structure their will, because they will have seen the consequences of certain things, but also we're going to need that to really understand the financial situation, the financial forecast, and what might be necessary. So I would, even if clients don't have a will, as a first step, I would mock a will up. The next thing that I want to do is look at the situation where we leave the cottage to Bill Jr. So again, this is a second marriage, blended family. Bill Jr. is actually Bill's son from a previous relationship. And to my knowledge, all planning software assumes everything Bill has rolls over to Sue. But in the case of second marriages and blended families, that's most often not at all the case. So in this particular case, what I have at the moment is I have the cottage going to Sue. So this is the standard assumption. All of Bill's assets are going to Sue. So if we go back and we have a look at the estate output, we can see she's the sole beneficiary. She's getting absolutely everything, nothing in the way of terminal taxes to speak of. Remember, Bill's dying quite a few years from now, so the tax brackets are all indexed. Minor negative residue for distribution. So this is exactly what we looked at originally. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the beneficiary of the cottage to Bill Jr. So Bill says, Sue, you're getting my half of the house, you're getting the art, you're getting my TFSAs, my RSPs, the life insurance and so on, but I can't leave my child out of my will. This is the Smith family cottage, so I'm going to leave it to Bill Jr. And of course, capital gains are realized, paid by the estate. And now when we have a look at the estate output, what we see is that it's a complete disaster. And you'll notice you have the ability to compare any two solutions. So I'm going to compare everything going to Sue. The government doesn't get too much, with the cottage going to Bill Jr., far less for Sue, a lot for Bill Jr., the value of the cottage, and of course the government's going to get a great deal. So we're very easily able to show clients the impact of the different terms of their wills. So let's, the one other thing that I just wanted to mention, by the way, is that Bill Jr. is getting a cottage, and you can see the value is $2 million. You may think that's a little outrageous. Actually, for Muskoka and areas like that in Ontario, it's not. But I wanted just to point out that the value of the cottage currently is only $500,000. And that's very commonplace in Ontario. So what's happening is we're applying an appreciation rate of over 6%. And the reason that we do this is because what we do is we actually assume, and you can change this like anything in the software, but we actually assume the long-term provincial residential real estate growth rate for any real estate properties. And you can see that for over a quarter of a century in Ontario, that's averaged over 6%. Now, the reason I mention this is because other software will use, again, as far as I know, an inflation assumption. And yet there's absolutely no evidence for any of the provinces that that's an appropriate rate to use. And by using an inflation assumption, which if we look back and we can see it here, the long-term rate, 3.5%, shorter term rate, like 20 years, 2%, we're going to severely understate the capital appreciation of the cottage and therefore the terminal taxes. So I actually think that in the case of secondary residences, rental properties, things like that, it's a more conservative approach to use the long-term rate because it will, I believe, more accurately capture the tax impact. So we've got a real problem here in this negative residue for distribution. And there are a couple of ways to handle it. Most often, we'll look at insurance, but I wanted to also touch on one other consideration, and that's the use of a testamentary trust. So it's possible that instead of the cottage going to Bill Jr., a testamentary trust could be set up. The cottage could go into the spousal trust. All we're going to do, of course, is defer the capital gain problem and likely make it even larger. But there's also the possibility that Sue is younger than Bill, a woman, maybe is able to have life insurance that the trust could acquire on her and so on in order to pay all those terminal taxes, something that may simply not be possible in Bill's case. So rather than having to use TrustWorks and go through the whole setup and the transfer of the cottage into the trust and so on, what we did was we built in some generic trusts. You can see them here: spousal, family, Henson, charitable trust. So we built in some generic trusts just to be able to illustrate to clients the concept. So remember, planning is about learning and decision making. And as we help clients see for themselves, working with them interactively, the consequences of their circumstances, what we also want to be able to do is show them different approaches that they can take that may be beneficial to them. So in this case, all I need to do is say, instead of it going to Bill Jr., it could go to a spousal trust. Ultimately, the terms of the trust are that the cottage will be passed on to Bill Jr., but because it goes to a trust, there is no capital gain on your death. It's the equivalent of a spousal rollover. Sue is younger, et cetera, and we can look at the possibility of buying insurance within the trust to cover its terminal tax or its taxes. So now if we go back to the estate output, instead of the cottage going to Bill Jr., we see that the cottage is going to the trust. So let's go back now to the insurance consideration, which is what's used most often, needless to say. And I want to point out a couple of things. In this situation, we know that the problem is the capital gains on the cottage. And yet the life insurance benefit is going to Sue. And this is always done because, of course, what we need to do is we need to look at probate fees. So you can see 33,000 in inflated dollars, 21,000 in constant dollars. But it's not Sue who necessarily needs the life insurance. It's actually the estate that needs the life insurance for liquidity reasons. So I want you to consider that if we change the life insurance beneficiary from Sue to the estate, then yes, if we go back and we have a look at probate fees, we'll see that they're higher, 36,000 instead of 33, and in today's dollars, 24,000 instead of 21. but the difference in the probate fees is really negligible compared to the impact on the negative residue. So by having the insurance paid to the estate, then we're going to end up reducing the residue for distribution problem, because it's really the estate that needs the insurance. I want to look at one other case where we have the estate getting the insurance, but in addition, what I want to do is look at a charitable donation. So keep in mind, and this is why I modeled the artwork in Bill's name. So keep in mind that when it comes to estate planning, there may be assets that clients don't really value more than, for instance, the cottage. Keeping the cottage in the family may be their greatest concern. So again, this gets into the whole idea of values-based estate planning. So all I'm going to do is go to the Will tab, and I'm going to select that piece of art, and I'm going to donate it to a charity. And just to be a little outrageous, I'm going to assume it's a cultural donation. If it's a cultural donation, of course, capital gains taxes aren't taken into the estate tax terminal return. Now, I grant you, very few people will have cultural property that they can donate, but it makes this whole illustration just a little more dynamic when we have a look at it. So now, what we can do is go back and look at the insurance to the estate, and then look at the cultural donation. And so we see that instead of $275,000 underwater, that the estate, because of the donation, is now only $177,000 underwater. So we see that Sue is getting less because she's not getting the art, but by the same token, the government is getting far less. So just, and I know that it would be unusual to have a cultural donation, but just keep in mind the ability to donate assets as a way of lowering taxes and making insurance then more affordable. So the one final thing that I'm just going to point out about this technique is that the amount of insurance required, the cost given Bill's age and so on, may be, I don't want to say prohibitive, but punitive in a way that the premiums on the insurance are going to impair Bill and Sue's retirement lifestyle. So just remember that in our software, anybody can pay for anything. So the common example that I use is that we don't model Bill Jr.'s education expense on Bill's tab, Sue's tab, or the joint tab. We actually model it on Bill Jr.'s tab. And the reason is Bill Jr. is the one who's going to university, and anybody could be a payer for that. We could have Bill paying part of it, Sue paying part of it, grandparents paying part of it, and so on. So remember, in the software, there's a separation of who pays for things and who does things. And this also applies in the case of insurance. Why couldn't we have Bill Jr. at a certain age, an appropriate age for him, pick up part of the insurance cost? He's the one who's going to benefit from the cottage. So why shouldn't he be sharing in the insurance? And then that can have a big effect on the value of the or on the estate output. Now, in this case, it's not something that I modeled exactly correctly to illustrate the point, but I just want to bring out that whole concept of payer. The final thing I want to do today is have a look at this whole issue about the order of withdrawals. So this from retirement plans. So this gets a lot of attention. If we withdraw earlier, we'll pay less tax, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen in a past webinar that while that may be true, What's also true is that we can lose the effect of compounding. So I'm not so sure that early withdrawals from RIFs is such a good idea because of the power of compounding. In this case, I want you to notice that we're withdrawing from the non-reg portfolio first, tax-paid capital in retirement. We're saving money in the RSP until that's used up. And if we look at the estate output, what we see is that the residue for distribution is negative $352,000. So I'm going to create a new solution, and I'm just going to call this order non-reg last. And all we have to do now is go to tactics, change the order of withdrawals so that the RRSP is first. And when we do, we see the impact. The value of the income assets is about $75,000 less because we've lost that whole impact of compounding. But when we go to the estate output, and I'll just switch this back to the order of withdrawals, what we see is that the residue for distribution, which was going to be 352 negative if we took money out of the non-reg first, is now only going to be 177 negative. So there's a lot of talk about the order of withdrawals and tax optimization and so on. And I think we need to be very careful about that because it's also very important that we understand what the effect of all of that is on the estate output. And it could very well be that clients have more than enough money. Wealth optimization is not important to them. Taking money out of the RIF first is fine, even though it reduces their wealth, as we saw. But it maintains more liquid cash, which is what's necessary to pay the terminal estate charges. So I think it's very important that we help clients explore the different possibilities, because it's really what's most important to them. It's, as I often say, the best plans are not the ones that are mathematically the best. The best plans are the ones that clients are comfortable with and which suit their values, and therefore they naturally implement them. And this is particularly important, I think, especially when we're talking about mass affluent and higher net worth clients, when we talk about the estate output. So thank you for your time. We will be, of course, issuing our newsletter next Tuesday, and it will have this video embedded in it.
Book a demo. We'd be happy to show you more of VisionWorks' incredible features.